Welcome back to Key Messianic Prophecies, a podcast brought to you by Telios, a private 501c3 nonprofit foundation dedicated to the research and accurate teaching of the Bible, founded by Bill and Jeanette Stewart. On this episode, we will continue looking at the Psalms, specifically looking at Psalm 110. Psalm 110 is one of those psalms that is broadly accepted to be messianic in nature. There are a lot of psalms that are hotly debated among scholars. We've looked at some of those. But there is a very kind of striking, almost universal assent, even among some of the more ardent, non-messianic interpreters, that David is pretty clearly speaking of the Messiah in this psalm. That being said, of course, there are a number of detractors, but this is one of the rare instances where those individuals are usually in the minority. The content of Psalm 110 deals primarily with the Messiah as the eternal king priest, described in the opening verses of the psalm as being a divine king, sitting at God's right hand, and also described as a priest in the order of Melchizedek in subsequent verses. Melchizedek, if you remember back in Genesis 14, was this unique priest king whom Abram encountered. The idea here is that this Messiah will unite the offices of priest and king in a way that hasn't been seen since Melchizedek in the ancient times of pre-national Israel. And not only will this Messiah unite the priesthood and the kingship, but we also see that he will be victorious over his enemies and ultimately usher peace into the world. Now remember that in this podcast series, we are interested in interpreting the Psalms canonically. That is to say, we want to keep each psalm in its place in the larger context of the book. In this respect, we see that Psalm 110 acts as a kind of thematic unifier that bridges the gap between Psalms 107 to 109 and Psalms 111 to 113. We see that Psalms 107 to 109 contain pleas by God's people for deliverance, and Psalms 111 to 113 contain praise for deliverance. This leaves Psalm 110 as the hinge upon which this deliverance turns. And in this psalm, we read about the actions of the divine priest king to bring about that deliverance. So, contextually, there's a good amount of evidence to suggest that this is very much a picture of the eternal priest king of Israel, the Messiah. Interestingly, in the New Testament, Jesus confronts the Pharisees using this very psalm. In Matthew 22, verses 41 to 46, he asks the Pharisees a very pointed question about the Messiah and how that Messiah is reckoned as a son of David. And Jesus quotes this very psalm to them in reference to the Messiah, and the Pharisees fail to answer the question. They fail to explain how the psalm could present the Messiah as both the son of David and a divine ruler. The irony, of course, being that the answer was standing right in front of them, asking them the question. So Jesus himself reckoned this psalm as dealing with Israel's Messiah. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Key Messianic Prophecies. We will continue our study in the next episode, where we will cover Psalm 132, and we will then finish out our study of the book of Psalms and continue through the Old Testament.